So, before I forget everything, I wanted to tell you about our very first craft fair ever last weekend. Um, there were a number of things that I was well prepared for, and a number of things that I wasn't as a first time craft fair vendor. Longtime shopper, brand new vendor. So, one of the things right off the bat was when I called to see if they still had space. They said that they had 6 foot tables, and they certainly had space for me to have one, and asked if I wanted two. While I was on the phone with them, never having put together a craft fair table of my items before, 6 feet of space seemed enormous. It seemed like more than enough for our very first craft fair. Um, as it turns out, 6 feet is really small. It's really, really tiny. When we got there, the tables were not 6 feet, they were 8 feet. So, bonus. But I was really astonished by how quickly I filled that space. Now, mind you, I was bringing handmade and vintage. So, my available selection in my office was way, way beyond the space that we chose, which was an 8 foot table. Uh, I was really surprised. I don't know why. I've photographed it all. I've listed it all on multiple platforms. It's not like I didn't know how much I had, but nevertheless, I went in worried about having enough and came out realizing I have plenty. As long as I can still bring vintage, I have more than enough to walk in with confidence to a craft fair and know that I have a selection and a quality selection for at almost any price point for anyone who stops by my booth. So that was a plus. The second thing was actually a piece of advice I got from someone on TikTok who did a series on people prepping for a craft fair. And a lot of the production part didn't really apply to me, but this was great advice. If it's your first time, set up your table at home, and the night before, I mean, you can do it the day before the craft fair. Doesn't have to be, you don't need to admire it like a monument for a week. Just set it up, pack it up, and as you pack it up, load the car the night before. You don't want to be doing that first thing in the morning when you're trying to get out the door. And always load the car as you pack the table so that the top layer, the displays, that kind of stuff, goes into the car first, so it'll come out last. And as you pack each layer in, you end up with the bottom layer, the very first stuff you need, the table cover, if you're bringing chairs, if you're bringing the tent, whatever it is that you're going to use very first thing when you get to the site, that's the last thing into the car, and it's the first thing out. That was great advice. Seems simple, seems obvious once you say it out loud, but man, that smoothed the waters for us that morning, trying to get ourselves out the door on the morning of the first snow flurry of the year. The next first for the day was my square reader. I'd never done a craft fair, so I had never been on the vendor side of using one of those before. And I gotta say, on the customer side, you don't really notice. I didn't really notice the process, what anyone was doing. Just, pay here, there you go. Speaking to other vendors, I discovered that most people were using the square reader. There are a couple of options. There's a free option. There's a $50 option. I'll tell you the difference in a second. And then there's a swank like $200 option that you would put at a point of sale if you had a permanent store or something like that. So the free version is where you can swipe the card. It doesn't have a feature for contactless pay. So like people can't use Google Pay or Apple Pay or whatever pay option they've got going on. They can't use their phone to pay on that free version. So if you're doing your first craft fair and you cannot afford to invest in the $50 version for your first craft fair, definitely save out $50 from what you make at the craft fair and treat yourself to the upgraded version for your next craft fair. It was great. Worked perfectly, set up smoothly. I'm not super tech. I mean, I'm not clueless, but it was really simple. It was very new user friendly. And one of the things I really liked about it, and I don't think this happens with the free version with the app, but I could be wrong about that. You can set up beforehand. Like when I installed it ahead of time, I got into the app and kind of fished around and checked everything out. And you can enter items. I recommend you don't get too specific, but if you have general price points, you can enter those as items. It'll totally streamline the checkout process. So even though it was our first time, checking out customers went really well, really smoothly. One gentleman had a card that was so old, there was no chip, there was nothing. And so I had to figure out how to key in the number. And even that went smoothly once I figured out where I needed to go. Clearly labeled, I was just flustered. So, Square Reader, I think that's my third point. I just wanted to let you know it's a good deal. My fourth point is about displays. Our table looked really good, but I'm going to be honest with you, two of the displays they looked great, but they were challenging for the customers to interact with easily, just seamlessly. The hooks that we chose for the earrings, I had my earrings on cards, so there was one hole at the top of the card, you put it right on a hook. The hooks that we chose were wide enough that the cards fit snugly, but flush enough with the back surface that it was a pain in the butt for the customers who took a card off to take a card off, and then who took a card off and wanted to put it back on. It wasn't the seamless experience that I wanted my customers to have. You don't want your customers to feel frustrated by anything at your booth. So that was a mistake, and it's one that I'll make a priority to correct before we do our next craft fair. Fifth and final point, this is especially for people who have been online sellers and plan to continue being online sellers, whether of your own items or resale of vintage and antique items. Nothing is going to prepare you for how out of whack your storage system is going to be when you return from a craft fair. Some of them may have more of a breakdown time, but even if they have the time available, you're going to reach the end of the craft fair and be like, awesome, let's get out of here. So we literally just scooped across the table and got things in boxes and areas in our storage. We'll sort it out when we get home. Man, I have a pretty good organized system for online selling, and I've been using it for many years, and it's been very successful. And I ripped it to freaking shreds, picking out pieces to bring to the craft fair, and the fallout having to put it back together when I brought those pieces home. Let me think for a second how many we brought. 20, 40, we didn't bring that much, maybe 160, 180 pieces total. And we didn't display all of them. We brought backups in case there was a lot of foot traffic and we made a lot of sales, we could fill the table back in. So yeah, it was a flippin' free-for-all when we got everything home, and I had to sort of get everything back in order so I can find it if somebody buys it online. It's got me really thinking about whether or not I want to have a separate batch of stock that's meant for craft fairs and doesn't have to necessarily invade what I'm offering online. And even as I say that, I know that's not going to work because I make, one of a kind rosaries and pocket rosaries. I'm going to be starting on rings really soon that I won't necessarily be able to just duplicate and have one here for online and there for craft fairs. So I just wanted to, and take this all with a grain of salt because I am super organized. So when that organization was shredded before my eyes and I had to put it back together, that threw me for a loop. But if you are also an organized person, brace yourself, because it's a huge aspect of the process to reintegrate everything once you've got it back at home or back in your workshop that I really wasn't prepared for that. So there you go. I guess we'll stop there at 5. Those are the 5 main things that I took away from my very first craft fair, which was fantastic, by the way. Amazing people, very encouraging, more experienced vendors, and really sweet and wonderful hosts. It was at a church and they were just lovely. So that's what I know. So just to run back through really quickly, 6 to 8 foot tables, they're smaller than you think. If you are an online seller and you've got, or if you're an artisan from scratch person and you have 150 to 200 items, you've got more than enough to fill an 8-foot table and have half your stuff still in the drawer, ready to fill in after you've made sales. That's number 1. Number 2, pack your table, set up your table, and pack it layer by layer into the car the night before. So you're not messing with it in the morning, and the last thing into the car is the first thing that comes out. It'll be your first layer. The third thing I mentioned was the square reader, I think. I strongly recommend ease of use, ease of connectivity. It was terrific. I went for the $50 version. If you need to start with the free version, do it. But save out the $50 from your first round of sales and treat yourself to the upgrade. It's totally worth it. Check your displays from the customer side, not just for appearance, but for ease of use, so that your customers aren't frustrated when interacting with your items. And last but not least, gird your loins for the madness that is trying to get all of those pieces back into your organized inventory when you get them home. Anyway, talk to you soon. If you enjoyed this content, like and subscribe, and the gods of YouTube will show you more of it. I'm Allison White from WhyteWing.com, and thanks for playing.